Over the past 33 years as a professional musician, living and working across the globe, I have been fixated on mindset. The way we think influences the way we speak and behave, leading to the results we experience. The recent pandemic lockdown gave me an opportunity to study psychology and coaching formally, and I am now certified in various types of mindset coaching, including NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. As I have spent most of my life around creative people, I am well aware of the mental challenges faced by us creatives. Whether it be audition nerves or performance anxiety, challenges associated with being a quiet person or introvert in an otherwise extroverted environment, or the mental struggles that accompany performance-related injuries such as focal dystonia. I will be providing podcasts for you in this series to address these subjects and more. In this first episode, I will be exploring focal dystonia, awareness, mindset, and rehab. My guest is Francesco Losordo, better known as Frankie. Frankie is a horn player in the West Australian Symphony Orchestra who recently recovered from focal dystonia and now runs the brass rehab program. This is Mindset for Creatives. Hello, Frankie, and thank you for joining me today on Mindset for Creatives. First of all, I'm very impressed with what you've been doing with your brass rehab program. I understand that you have been through a quite journey with focal dystonia, experiencing that, and then going through a rehab process. So first of all, Frankie, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me. And yeah, it's good to see you again after all these years. For those listeners and people watching, I went through university in Sydney, and Steve was one of the staff faculty there. And he was the teacher that would put in 120%. And you're like, who is this guy? So yeah, it's great to be able to connect with you again after all these years.
And I remember you, Frankie, as one of the star students. And then we became professional colleagues when you came into the Sydney Symphony Orchestra as a casual musician. And it was no surprise that you got that job with the West Australian Symphony Orchestra right away as a very young man. So tell us about focal dystonia. What is it and how did it affect you?
Yeah, so first off, about focal dystonia, in the brass world, this is kind of the only word that we know about injuries. When we talk about injuries in the brass world, usually this is the kind of bang word that everybody goes, oh, maybe it's focal dystonia. Focal dystonia is a neurological condition. And while it's true that a lot of injuries are focal dystonia, I would say more than half of the injuries that happen in the embouchure aren't actually focal dystonia. They're more likely to be overuse syndrome. But then it's tricky because other injuries can turn into focal dystonia after a period of time. So from the research that's happening as we speak, this is a relatively new thing that the world is learning about. They found that focal dystonia can be genetic. It can be caused or brought on by mental health, depression, anxiety, paired with, injuries in our playing that can kind of snowball into something more serious like focal dystonia. So focal dystonia is this kind of wider picture that we're still learning a lot about, but not all injuries are focal dystonia. But so yeah, I had definitely issues with overuse syndrome about 10 years ago. And within the space of 2 weeks, my playing crumbled to the point that I couldn't hold a middle note at all. And I just passed my trial with the West Australian Symphony Orchestra. So it's not like I was doing anything wrong or what I thought was anything wrong. I was at the top of my game and this just hit me like a train. And I was not able to play a single note. So yeah, that's my experience of when it happened. And we might delve into how I got back.
And I believe we have a recording here.
Yeah, at the lowest of the low. Yeah. So this is when I was at the lowest of my low. This is just before I sent the email to the orchestra saying, look, I need to take a break. I can't play at all. Yeah, have a listen to this.
All right. We're going to have a listen to Frankie before and after his rehab. So, Frankie, what was going through your head when you couldn't play?
It's a good question. It's a really good question because the symptoms of something like focal dystonia is not the same as what, as brass players we get week in, week out. There'll be a day that you get up and play and you're like, oh, it feels like crap, or, but this was different. All of a sudden, I couldn't. So it starts in the middle register, which we all think is the easiest register. But there was one note that was just a bit woofy, and I was like, what? Why is this middle note? It should be so easy. And then from that note, I couldn't play it loud or soft, or I couldn't articulate. It was just very strange. And then that kind of crept out from that note. And then I couldn't really play anything loud or soft, and everything was just a bit woofy. And I thought, must be my breathing, must be my setup. I was then kept trying to practice and practice and practice, trying to get it going again. And then my pitch dropped like a quarter tone, and that's when I was really like, what is this? What's going on? This is not something that we talk about, these kinds of things happening. And I didn't know who to talk to, what to do. And eventually I spoke to, in Australia, we're very lucky to have this Dr. Bronwyn Ackerman, who is one of the world's leading not only researchers but rehabilitators in this area. And I gave her a call, and she was very quick to say, yeah, look, sounds like you've got overuse in your face or focal dystonia. Book a one-way ticket to Sydney, come see me. So and so that's probably when I took this video, and I don't know why I took the video. No one told me to do it. I just thought, maybe I thought it was funny, or maybe I wanted to document it. But I'm so glad that I did that video now, even and during my rehab, to look back on that video and just see how bad things were. There was a genuine attempt at a C major scale, by the way. So yeah.
Wow. And so Bronwyn helped you. What did she do? How did she help you?
The first thing she asked me, she's like, how do you breathe? What are you doing when you breathe? What are you thinking about? And I kind of fumbled my way through. It's like, oh, yeah, breathe low, open your throat, things that until that point I'd done in lots of classes at the conservatorium. We did a lot of things like breathing gym, which give you breathing exercises, but I was never actually taught, how to breathe. Like, we never really taught about the mechanics of it and stuff. So Bronwyn straight away said, okay, well, yeah, let's give the playing a rest. Let's just talk about breathing for a bit. And at that point, emotionally, I couldn't even get the horn out of the case. I didn't want to look at it, didn't want to try. I was embarrassed because I couldn't play a note. I didn't know where to start. I was ashamed. I felt, I just didn't want to play for anyone or try and fix it. I just really couldn't get out of the case. So for 2 months, I worked with Bronwyn just on the mechanics of breathing, just how to access the pelvic floor, movement in the ribs, what has to happen, and especially the timing of when all these things have to happen. During that time as well, I learned a lot of exercises off the instrument, using toothpicks and straws and marshmallows and all sorts of things to isolate and strengthen muscles in the face. And then it wasn't until 3 or 4 months into my rehabilitation I actually started playing for 5-10 minutes at a time. And 6 months later, from the beginning of rehab, I was back in the orchestra playing at a higher level than I'd ever played in my life. So
Wow.
yeah, I owe everything to Bronwyn Ackerman. Yeah.
Wow. And as a matter of fact, for those of you who are listening or watching this, Bronwyn Ackerman will be my next guest in this series of focal dystonia awareness, prevention, and rehab. Frankie, one thing that really resonated with me was the mental struggles you went through when you came to Sydney.
Yeah.
When you looked at the horn, what sort of mindset struggles did you go through?
I'll tell you that as soon as I came down with this injury, the first thing I did was book an appointment with a psychologist because I knew that this was going to be a hard journey. I'd seen a psychologist a couple of times before, and so I actually knew what I was getting into by seeing somebody, and I knew how beneficial seeing, a counselor talking about this would be, because I knew it was going to be a rough trot. My mindset was different at different points. So at the beginning, it was just complete embarrassment, shock. And then as the journey with rehabilitation went on and I saw small improvements, and you're learning all this information, I quickly learned that actually this could be something really exciting. If I can sort this out, this will never happen again. I learned so much about breathing and the mechanics and everything that there was no way that I could have an injury ever again because I knew too much now. Some would call this paralysis by analysis, but I genuinely believe that all this information can be used, if packaged right, can be used as a really positive mindset going forward.
And Frankie, as we discussed in our discussion before this interview, I am coaching as an NLP practitioner coach a few people who are going through this focal dystonia rehab, and wow, it is amazing how the mind sort of leads and the rest follows.
Yeah, it's nothing to be underestimated, the way that the mental affects the physical, and it's different for everybody. There's my story will be very different to somebody else, and now 10 years on from my injury, I work with Bronwyn Ackerman, helping musicians all around the world, professional, amateur, everything. And I'll tell you that 80%, easily 80% of those people will have something going on outside of their playing that I believe has triggered it. So often there'll be a marriage breakup, there'll be severe depression, anxiety, trauma in their life, someone close to them has died, abuse, something huge outside of their life that has happened around the same time that they got injured. And so for me, it was this build-up of my dream to get a job in an orchestra in Australia. This dream, you work hard, you work everywhere, and then you get this dream, this tension, pass my trial, that release. And that's what I believe was the trigger for the timing of my injury. It's just it can't be anything else. So, yeah.
Frankie, where would you be now if you had not gone to Bronwyn, if you'd not named the injury and sort of tried to trudge forward in denial? What would have happened then?
I think two things. So I think I would have either tried to fix it myself and gone for a year or two trying to figure out what's going on, and it would have gotten worse and worse. And then I would have had to quit. Like a lot of people that I see have tried to do it themselves, but there's just not many people in the world that are doing this kind of rehabilitation. And they try to do it themselves, and the longer it goes on, the worse it can get. But during that time, after my injury, I really had to ask myself, okay, what is my identity? Like, am I just a horn player? Like, this has been ripped away from me as a person. I can't play the horn anymore. Who the hell am I? I mean, I have a beautiful wife and now I have a beautiful son, but that's not going to pay the bills, just being a husband. So do I have any other interests? I haven't worked another job ever. I started playing professionally for money when I was 18. So you really have to ask yourself, like, who am I? And what can I do? What am I interested in? What would I retrain? Yeah, who knows where I would be, but I'm so glad that, the rehabilitation is not only brought me back as a player, but now as somebody who is able to help others going through this. There is an answer. Traditionally, as you would know, Steve, if a player lost their chops, they would just quit or they'd just be buried under the carpet. No one would really talk about it. It's this taboo. It's like, oh no, he lost his chops. But there is help now, I think, or we want to make some kind of help.
Frankie, part of the discussion we had before this interview as well was ramping up awareness of not only focal dystonia, but any kind of injury that musicians will sustain. Now, in this session, we're talking about focal dystonia. What sort of awareness do you think needs to be in the culture of symphony orchestras, professional bands, anywhere where brass or wind players are employed? What sort of growth and improvement do we need in the culture for awareness of focal dystonia?
Yeah, focal dystonia and anything to do with mental health or physical health in musicians is something relatively new that's been not only researched but coming into fruition in orchestras and in bands and in all of the arts. What we know is that 70 up to 70% of musicians will face a career-threatening injury, whether it's mental or physical, at some point in their career. And so this is a crazy statistic. So what I would say is that there's no shame in seeing a psychologist or seeing an NLP coach or seeing a counselor or still getting lessons, like when you're either past uni or during uni or just talking about this kind of stuff. When I went through university, no one talked about mental health, about anxiety, panic attacks, depression. There was no class, there was no guest speaker that talked very openly about this. This is starting to change, but it's very slow. And so I think it's people like you, Steve, that are coming out that are professional musicians, top of their game, but they're highlighting the need for better wellness. You just have to read the back of the newspaper, the sports section, that all they're talking about is the wellness of the athletes, that, oh, this guy's out for 6 months with an injury. Imagine if you could read about that for orchestras, but you would never read about that in an orchestra. It's all just presented as this perfect machine of musicians just at the top of their game, just like athletes. And we're expected to play at the top of our game till we're 65. There's so many things can and do go wrong for musicians.
Well,
So
I'm glad you bring
yeah.
that up, Frankie, because that brings me back to when I was a kid growing up in California, going to baseball games. You would have the roster of players, and there would be who's playing, who is on the bench, and who is on the disabled list. And this was
Yeah.
public, and it was in the program. Now imagine if they did this with orchestras. You went to the symphony concert, you have your program. These are the people on stage, these are the people on the bench, and these are the people on our disabled list. There's not much
Yeah.
shame in that, is there?
There shouldn't be, but there is, unfortunately. And it's musicians. We're brought up from a very early age to walk around polishing ourselves. Being perfectionists. Honing our craft, trying to get as good as we can, not making mistakes. And so it's no wonder that we are ashamed to admit to anybody that we are struggling in any way. So yeah, and this is especially for freelance musicians. When I had anxiety and panic attacks, I was in Sydney, working with the Sydney Symphony, but I didn't want to tell my teacher, didn't want to tell my colleagues, didn't want to tell other students. Who do you talk to? So it's really important that people like you, Steve, are out there as people that are trained, that are trustworthy, that have been through it all. That are in the industry, that get it. It can be very tricky to sometimes explain to an outside, especially psychologist, just what we go through as musicians, and even family members, like trying to explain that you're injured to a family member. It's very difficult because it's just very hard to paint that picture about what we do.
Yeah, it's time to put a bit of a spotlight and define clearly a call for action, isn't it? And what I would suggest that to be, if anybody is out there and thinking that they might be showing signs or experiencing symptoms of focal dystonia or any other sort of work-related injury, which is basically what it is, be transparent, be open with the loved ones closest to you. Hopefully, if you do work for an organization, you have an HR person that you can go to. As you said, freelance players will probably have somebody in their local union, but there's a duty of care that the unions have and that the orchestras and bands and other arts organizations, that when an employee needs some counseling for some psychological pick-me-up, psychiatrists and psychologists, and of course they have their professional development programs as well. So my call to action would be for anybody who might think they're experiencing this, or somebody who might be, especially if you know somebody who might be, put your arm around them, take them in, say, it's okay, mate. It's okay. We're going to find out and you have help. And we all need to be in this together for the future of our community of orchestral musicians, artists, creative people.
Yeah, 100%. Even another example, which a psychologist gave me as a tool to use when I first was going through this injury. They said, pick someone in the orchestra. So that for you, this could be in your band or other musicians in the city that you live in. They said, pick somebody that you trust, that's like a father or mother figure to you, that you can just tell privately that you're going through this, and you just want someone, a safe person that you can just come and break down to, or someone in the workplace that you feel comfortable just checking in on you, like a buddy, because often you won't want it to be your boss or someone in your section, someone else that you can relate to, that is a good support for you. So that's also something that might be helpful for you, especially if you're a student. It's really hard to find help. Yeah.
All right, Frankie, before we close up, one more thing, and this might be one of the biggest takeaways, if not the biggest takeaway from this session. How will somebody know if they're experiencing symptoms of focal dystonia or a similar injury?
Oh, geez, save the best till last. This is a tricky one. Like I said, we all have bad days. That's just a fact. That's just life. It's when injuries, it's when things that you're playing that are very different start happening and don't go away or get much worse. But often, so things like parts of your chops might be shaking, or you might feel like shooting pain somewhere, and it might not necessarily be directly where the embouchure is vibrating. It might be up around your nose, or it could be in your neck, or so definitely shooting pain, or aching pain, or just weakness, numbness in the face. Some people might feel like what feels like a little like a pea or a rice grain shaped lump somewhere in their lip. There's a lot of different things, but you'll probably know, because it'll be so weird and so out there that that you'll notice it. But I don't want you to panic. I want you to know that there is help out there now. It's not just a thing that you have to. And often people will be like, "Oh, just take a rest. Just take 2 weeks off." Rest is always the best thing that you can do to start with. But if it is still there after a couple of weeks, whatever it is, that's when you should seek help as soon as you can.
Well, that's very valuable information, Frankie. So if any of us starts experiencing that, we'll know to check in with the right people. Frankie, thank you very much for all this information. This has been very useful for our listeners. And I would like to invite all of our listeners now to go and visit Brass Rehab on Facebook. Tell us a little bit, Frankie, about your Brass Rehab Facebook page and how people can find that.
Yeah, so we put up a Facebook page and also an Instagram page. Ultimately, the end goal for Brass Rehab, as well as offering complete rehabilitation one-on-one programs for clients, is to one day be able to put out a course that you can do online with videos and stuff like that, not only for musicians but for medical professionals, because I've read some of the medical guidelines that GPs or doctors get. So if you present and you think you have focal dystonia, GPs can kind of flick through a bit of a book and see, okay, well, what do we do for that? And one of the only things they have on there is Botox. It's like, and Botox is not proven to be the fix it for all. So that's just one small example about actually how the medical world needs to learn more about this as well. So our ultimate goal is to present a course that is for both musicians and medical professionals to learn more about injuries in brass players. And so what the Facebook page and Instagram page are doing are just some small snippets of some of the exercises or some like debunking myths about playing. So there's a lot in there about breathing and support and muscles in the face, and just little kind of postcards about what we're about, what we're researching at the moment, and ways that we're trying to package current research, current peer-reviewed, really fantastic research that's coming from amazing people all around the world, and trying to package it in either musical examples or physical exercises that everybody can do.
Wow, that's wonderful. Frankie, on behalf of our listeners, I want to thank you wholeheartedly for coming on to this first podcast on focal dystonia awareness, prevention, and rehab. And I invite our listeners to tune in next month when I'm going to be having Bronwyn Ackerman talking about the same subject as well. And I am an NLP practitioner coach, so if anybody is interested in exploring more about mindset coaching for creative people, whether it be part of the focal dystonia rehab program or not getting nervous at auditions and things like that, please reach out. My email is tubacoach@gmail.com. And for those of you who are watching YouTube, click the links below for brass rehab and the coaching. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this podcast. This is Mindset for Creatives with Frankie Losordo. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, Steve. Great to see you again.
Thank you for listening to this first episode of my Mindset for Creatives podcast series. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share. And if you would like to access the video version, please visit Steve Rosse Mindset for Creatives YouTube channel. Please also be sure to visit Brass Rehab on Facebook. And if you are interested to find out more about the advantages of one-to-one or group mindset coaching for yourself, somebody you care about, or your organization, please visit my coaching website at www.steverosse.com.au, and you may also email me at tubacoach@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to being with you in my upcoming podcasts.